You ever heard of Warhammer Legos? The most shameful thing in my entire pile of shame, and boy howdy is it a shameful pile of shame, has got to be Warcry. Nick and I demoed this game and fell in love with it, immediately bought this box, brought it home, set it down, and then never touched it ever again. Actually, that's not quite true. Nick has taken point on Warcry, he assembled the terrain, he put together his Jade cultists, so actually, I'm the weak link for Warcry, but I'm trying, Ringo. I'm trying real hard. And I have big plans in store for Warcry. I don't want my games of Warcry to ever get stale. I want a new game every time. So we here at EonsOfBattle have created the perfect fantasy set of terrain, the Ruined Temple. Available on our Patreon now. It's a set of blocks, walls, and accessories that give the feeling of otherworldly architecture, a shrine from a more civilized, or perhaps much less civilized age. Only Games has printed all this out for us, and if you also want it physically, you can check it out linked below. These blocks can be assembled into all sorts of different pyramid shapes, from the Peruvian geometric monoliths to America's 8th wonder of the world, Bass Pro Shop. I want to make a big old pyramid, something that'll really show off my lizardman in style. I glued the blocks together using some good old epoxy. Pro tip, 5-minute epoxy is not 5-minute epoxy. You need JB Quick Weld, which actually sets in 6 minutes. I find epoxies work better for gluing irregular plastic surfaces permanently. I made up the footprint of my first layer and it reminds me of the nether portal from Minecraft. Although I got the dimensions wrong, so nothing happened when I used my flint and steel. What I could do is not glue anything and have loose bricks to be arranged differently each game, but I have a vision in my head. And I can save a little plastic too. I cut foam to match the hole in the middle using my saw to carve the foam flush with the top of the blocks. I did the same on my second layer using the decorative blocks to make a double-headed snake, and then laying it down on top, which gave me the feeling of building a very strange cake. And speaking of cake, it's time for decorating. I took my stairs and glued these down and placed a fresh block on each corner. These corners are where the torches will stand. I wish I had some more blocks because it's really fun to build these pyramids, and I have a few different shapes and sizes I'd like to try out, but this guy is looking perfect. And it's glued to the table, but I have a bunch of hobby techniques that I want to try out on this sucker. It's always a good idea to be careful while you're gluing, but in no time I had my workspace all fixed, and I filled up a tub with water. This is something I've been dying to try out. I took my hot glue gun and dripped it down into the water to make long, thin, irregular lines. On the water, it dries in a few seconds, and I pulled it out and coated all these silly strands with Elmer's glue, mixing it until every strand had a nice even coating. Then I took my glue mess onto an empty bag and sprinkled on coconut husk, mixing it together until each strand had a nice coating. Once it was dry, it forms pretty darn convincing vines. I might try this again using rope, but the hot glue gives me an idea. I laid my vines over the temple and hit it with my heat gun, and this made the vines lay down nicely onto the temple. I used plenty of super glue to keep them stuck down, and speaking of super glue, ultra thin super glue and coconut husk makes for a wild reaction. It gets so hot it almost catches fire. I made some larger piles that had some trees growing out of it, and now my temple is properly ruined. And by ruined, of course I mean fabulous. Ooh, I am liking this temple. Some good Warcry is gonna happen on this thing. Some nice line of sight blocking terrain, and you can hop on top of it for some nice capture the flag. And for more narratively driven games, it can turn into the portal. Although one big honking piece of terrain does not a board make. I need some walls. Warcry is a game all about movement, and anything that can force interesting movement is important. I have a very friendly and not at all scary looking archway and some interesting walls. I could make a proper building with this, but what I have in mind is an ancient ruined temple, barely still standing. Pyramids last thousands of years, walls, not so much. I glued together the walls, making some L shapes. These connection points are pretty small, so I switched from epoxy to thick superglue. Now I have my temple walls, and I use some of the smaller pieces to make little walls. Assembling this, it can make a nice little fighting arena, and it kind of reminds me of the building in Slender the 8 Pages, if anyone still remembers that game. There are a few remaining accessories, like the Zinchian torchbearer and the kissing snakes. All right, everything is built and ready for painting, and for painting, I have flat red primer, which is like a red-brown. And now I'm pretty sure Rust-Oleum spray paint is oil-based. And I don't know, I plan on using some oil paints later in the process, but I am gonna be covering up a lot of it with acrylic paint. I don't know, I've run into problems before with the oil paint not mixing well with the rattle can, but it's just so convenient for priming. I'm willing to run that experiment again, and we'll see what happens. The temple looks really good in brick red. I love a good prime because it takes all the flaws and disparate materials and turns them into real environments. I started off by laying down some colors with my airbrush. First, magenta. I don't expect much of this to shine through in the end, but I think it'll give the piece a more interesting look. And then I sprayed a light blue from above, a little like a zenithal highlight. And because it's going over red, I can go pretty extreme with the saturation and it won't look too crazy. Although speaking of crazy, it's a pretty great look. The hot, warm brown underneath the cold, cold blue from above. I think slap a little dry brushing on there and call it a day would be a great look, but I've got bigger plans. I sprayed some green in patches here and there on the temple and finished off with a light dusting of a cold white. The oils are gonna really darken the pieces, so I need them to be ultra bright. All right, most of the big airbrushing steps are done. Now I wanna lay down some specific gold in places, and so I have to do a little bit of masking. And y'all know what masking means. Time for a fun dog fact. Here we go. Fun fact, puppies have 28 teeth and normal adult dogs have 42. Whoa, wait, so dogs just like generate 14 extra teeth as they get older? That's weird. All right, it's time for gold. I used my not so fun dog facts to quickly spray the gold right into the shapes. This was particularly useful on the curve portal. It's hard to make masking tape bend in just the right way. And after the gold was applied, I broke out one of my favorite tools, Antelope Brown ink. This stuff is the color of yucky. I dusted this all over, which adds a sickly tint to my terrain. This terrain is getting me really excited to play some more Warcry. I've played Warcry before, but that was with someone else's terrain and models. I'm really excited to play it again with my terrain and models. And speaking of Warcry, not one of Games Workshop's more popular games, but that's good, because it means you can get the models cheap on eBay. I know I've got my eyes on the spider dudes, and I'm working on the Seraphon chameleons right now. He's a little pterodactyl. Now it is time for oil painting, and I have had mixed results with oil paint, but I got a brand new bag of latex-free makeup wedges. What could go wrong? I have a new product to try out, Oil Paint Fast Dryinator. It says water-based, but it is for oil paint. It says so on the side. I got out 4 little cups so I can make up a brown, black, magenta, and green wash, giving each mix a generous squirt of speed dry and then odorless white spirits. I slobber this onto my walls using a mix of all 4 colors, and after letting them rest for a few minutes, I came in with a paper towel and my makeup wedges to pull off the excess paint and leave behind the perfect wash, and immediately I noticed something was off. All right, somewhat expectedly, a few problems arose. Problem number 1, I spilled green paint all over my desk, and problem number 2, the paint is coming right off. I don't know what it is about me when I try to do oils, but it never seems to want to work out. But that's okay, because I have a plan. I have acrylic varnish. I'm gonna go ahead and varnish everything, lock that paint down, and then come back to the oils. I really like using these condiment cups for mixing because they come with a lid, and so I sealed up my paint and gave everything a nice wet spray of varnish. All right, I've got the acrylic clear coat on there, glossy. It's been drying overnight, so I'm ready to give oils a second try. Once more, I slobbered the terrain with oils. That acrylic clear coat should protect the spray paint from the oils, and after wiping the walls, they were looking epic. The oils add a ton of depth to the walls with so many colors all working together. I saw just a little bit of paint was coming off, but it's a lot better than yesterday. So I pushed ahead, and speaking of ahead, I worked on the head door. Starting off with the black, wiping that off and using that layer of black grime as a primer for more colors, coming back to add a little bit more green moss and magenta. And speaking of coming back, the EOB newsletter keeps me coming back. It's the best way to hear the goings on here at Eons of Battle and be entered into our monthly giveaways. This month, we're picking 1 follower to receive the Age of Sigmar Dominion box, and 3 followers will win this month's terrain. Follow the link in the description to sign up to our newsletter. After a few more attempts at oiling up these temple pieces, I really got into the groove of it. I slobbered on 2 colors, usually a black and brown, fully saturating the model and then wiping away 80% of it with a rag. And then taking a makeup wedge cut in half, soaked with white spirits, and doing a final clean, getting everything perfect. It makes quite a difference between the washed and unwashed terrain. And then I can go back in to add more colors like green to liven it up. The portal was the trickiest bit. It is big and hard to hold on to. That's what she said. And I really wish I had some larger disposable brushes, but eventually I got through it. And it was on to the final hurdle, the temple. I saturated everything in oil paint, making sure to get every nook and cranny, and then it was just a matter of how many makeup wedges will it take to clean. The answer? 20. Once that was taken care of, I put some extra green and brown oils over the vines. The oil painting is done. Oil painting is great. I would love to know how to do it someday, but for now I am very excited to get back to doing some good old-fashioned acrylic painting. These little flames are the cherry on top, and although I'm not much good at oils, it's fun to try new things, and it gave me an idea of how to approach these flames. I used very wet and watery colors to base coat the wood and charcoal, working quickly while the paint was still wet to get some nice blends going. And I did the same on the flames, base coating in yellow, and while it was still wet, dry brushing orange, which turned into wet blending, which gave me nice smooth transitions, which I perfected once they were dry with some real dry brushing of red. I airbrushed yellow on the bottom for a nice glow, and then attached these torches onto their ancient receptacles. The fires are a lovely little accent, and I had some inspiration. My pumpkin spice candle that's been keeping me company. Now, the oil paint is pretty much dry. I think the speed dry solution actually did a pretty good job. I wouldn't handle it too much or like lick it, but I'm pretty sure I can game on it. It may have taken me a year, but I came back with a vengeance. We have so much Warcry terrain now that no two games will ever have to be the same, and they look lovely together. Once again, this terrain can be found on our Patreon, and I am really excited to get some games of Warcry in.
So are we playing today?
I still gotta finish my lizards.